Staying connected matters. That's why AT&T has connectivity you can depend on, or they'll proactively make it right. That's the AT&T Guarantee. Terms and conditions apply. Visit att.com/guarantee for details. AT&T. Connecting changes everything. Sarah Ruhl, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. So if I understand this, I'm going to try to recapitulate the backstory to this book in brief, and then you can tell me if I've said it correctly and then maybe expand on it.
Okay.
But it sounds like you found yourself, especially during the pandemic, sucked into technologies, most specifically your phone. You were learning some things from your phone. Many of them were exacerbating your mental health. And that started you thinking about the importance of flesh and blood teachers.
Yes, I think that's very good. I mean, I would say it was probably a lot of things that combined to make me feel a little bit in despair about the world, what was going on politically. My health was falling apart. There were a lot of challenges I was facing, and I think I found myself looking for answers on my phone and thinking, oh, the opinion pages of the New York Times will tell me, or, oh, I can find out about this spiritual crisis on this app. And then I thought, no, I need my teachers. And I teach a class at Yale called Lessons from My Teachers, and it's a playwriting class. And so I already had in mind this idea of teaching legacy and trying to teach not just the content of what my teachers had taught me, but also the way they taught. And in thinking about that, I really started reflecting on how teaching is in time and space often. It's a relation. And how when we learn things from the internet or AI or masterclass or whatever it is, the relation is the one thing that's totally removed. And yet when you think of the impact great teachers have had on you, it's usually something very tangible.
I have a million questions, but let me just, and you don't have to answer this one if you don't want, but when you say your health was falling apart, what was going on?
I have 3 kids, and after I gave birth to twins, I got Bell's palsy, which is paralysis on this side of my face, and it wasn't going away. Usually it's 3 months, and mine just wasn't going away. And then I had all these other weird symptoms I would chase down, fatigue, neurological symptoms, and it turned out I had Lyme disease, and it took 10 years to get the diagnosis.
Whoa, that sucks.
It did suck. And writing a book, bizarrely, was what got me a diagnosis.
Huh, well, how?
So I wrote a memoir called Smile about the experience of not being able to smile for a really long time. And a doctor read it and called my husband's voicemail. My husband's a doctor. He tracked it down. And he said, "Forgive me for the intrusion, but I think you have late-stage neurological Lyme disease." And I was a little taken aback. And I said, "That's not possible. I've had testing. You know, like the blood work, the paperwork shows I don't have it." And he said, "You didn't get the right tests." So I got more tests. I got a spinal tap. I did indeed have it. And so then I shoved a port in. Well, I didn't do it myself. Doctors put a port into my arm, and I got IV antibiotics. And I was so much better.
Really?
Yeah.
But the Bell's palsy is still with you.
Yeah, I think that's sort of as good as it's going to get.
Got it.
Yeah.
So my great-grandfather, Benjamin Harris, had Bell's palsy, and I never met him, but I've heard tell of how annoying it was for him.
Yeah. It's a deeply psychological illness, actually, and no one tells you that. And I think partly they don't tell you that because they just hope you'll get better quickly. But when you don't, they don't really know what to tell you. But because your emotional life is also a social life.
Yes.
If you can't smile or evince joy or show joy in your face, it's really hard. So it took all my wherewithal to kind of get through that.
That's really interesting. So Bell's palsy, as I understand it, is one side of your face just you lose agency, like you cannot move.
Yeah, it's a cranial nerve that gets sort of cut, and it basically has to grow back. And they say either it grows back completely or it partially grows back. They don't really know why. It's idiopathic. Lyme disease can affect it. Childbirth can affect it.
Hmm.
So because I had childbirth, no one really looked deeper. But in fact, my husband and I had been in Long Island in a sort of shack in the woods right before onset. And he'd gotten the classic bullseye.
Yeah.
And I
From
didn't.
the tick bite.
From the tick bite.
Yeah.
And I didn't.
I've had that bullseye. It's scary.
Yeah. Yeah.
But just what you said about how happiness and human psychology is definitely not, and this is actually a huge cultural misunderstanding.
Mm.
It is not a solo endeavor. It is a social endeavor. I never thought about this before, but having restrictions on your ability to express emotions can have multiple really complex ramifications.
Yes. So how one feels about the self and what the range of your emotional life is. I mean, it's like you sort of feel like you can have joy internally, but if you can't show it, what is the experience of the joy? These are the questions that were sort of keeping me up at night. And I had these 2 little babies, and I really wanted to smile at them.
Yeah.
And I'd read literature on how if you don't smile at your babies, it fucks them up.
Huh.
Like there are these like studies of like quote unquote cold mothers who don't have affect and don't smile at their babies. And I was like, oh my God, I can't smile at them. And it took me years to process the thought that we're always making changes. We're always resilient in some way or another. And I realized, I was showing them love with my voice.
Yeah.
They got the love. It's okay.
Right. But do you find that people outside of your children where you have an intense relationship where you walk into a party and somebody might make an assumption about your mind state based on something you cannot control?
Yes. But they wouldn't say it because they're too polite. So you don't know. I mean, no one kind of remarks on what's going on with someone's face because it's so deeply personal.
Yeah.
So they probably clock it. And you don't know what they think.
Yes.
I mean, my own mother, who had Bell's palsy herself, but it got better more quickly, was at a play opening of mine. And she was sitting on the side of me. And she kept looking at me nervously during the first 10 minutes.
She was sitting on the side with the Bell's palsy.
And finally she said, "What's wrong? Are you not pleased?" And I was like, "Mom, I have Bell's palsy. I can't smile." And so I thought, if my own mother, who knows I have this condition, can't read my affect, God knows what strangers think. I mean, another funny story is my daughter, one of my twins is named Hope, and I couldn't say my P's at first. So I'd go to a party, and if it was loud, it was especially hard to say my P's. And they'd be like, "Oh, you had twins. What are their names?" And I'd be like, "Oh, William and Ho." And they're like, "Ho?" Ho. You know.
Yeah.
So people thought I'd named my daughter as a whore.
I mean, I clocked it when I walked in because I have been reading in your book, and the tone is joyful. And then I walked in, and I didn't know if you were joyful, and I knew about the Bell's palsy, but I kind of thought it had gone away. Yeah, based on what I had read in the book, and I mean, it did. I didn't take it too far, but I clocked it.
It's subliminal. It's really subliminal. And if I go to the doctor for something else, say. At some point during the visit, they'll say, "Are you aware that you have Bell's palsy?" And I'll say, "Yes, it's been 15 years."
15 years. Okay, well, I've taken
But you can tell I'm smiling now, right? Like I just went, you can tell that I had a positive reaction to what you were saying.
No, I read that as like a friendly grimace, meaning more like that you were echoing back to me and reflecting my commiseration.
Oh, interesting.
That's what I read it as.
Not to go too much into the Bell's palsy, but one thing that's really annoying about it is if your nerves grow back the wrong way, you get synkinesis. So they recruit the wrong muscles. Oh. So this side is trying to smile, and this side is like doing some other thing. Oh. And it can look like a grimace.
Okay. I don't know if I'm using the word grimace correctly.
No, you're using it exactly accurately.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, I didn't I took it the wrong way, but I didn't take it in a bad way.
Yeah. I can look like I'm commiserating.
Yes. That was a smile.
Yeah.
That I read as a smile.
There you go.
Right there.
Yeah.
Okay. I did take us down a little bit of a digression because
that's fine.
The last book was about smiles and this one's about teachers.
Yeah.
There were a million little stories in the book that I want to talk about, but just to stay on a high level, I think what you're saying to people is, I think you're saying a lot of things, and you may disabuse me of my thoughts, but I think what you're saying to people is there's a way of orienting to the world so that you're always being taught.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's about being in the position of a student and enjoying that position of curiosity. And you know, when you go down the garden path of some Buddhist teachers, they'll say, even the most annoying person, you should be grateful to, because they're teaching you something and they're helping you work on your patience. So, I mean, I think that was a revelation to me when I read that. I mean, I think there was a particular annoying person in the Buddha's life, some attendant or something. I forget his name.
Well, he had a cousin who tried to kill him with a drunken elephant.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And was he grateful for him because he taught him something?
I can't remember. I'm sure he was.
Right.
He was the Buddha.
Right. How not to get killed by a drunken elephant.
He might have been a drugged elephant, but they gave the elephant something to make him go mad and directed him toward the Buddha. This is the question with which this show is generally obsessed with. How? Mm-hmm. How do we orient? And we should talk about the why too, and you can take it in whatever order you want, but how do you have this attitude toward the world of openness and willingness, eagerness to learn?
I mean, I think there was something for me in the process of writing the book that just becoming aware of who your teachers have been creates a shift in you and makes you feel really grateful. Or at least it made me feel really grateful, because I realized I had these extraordinary teachers, from my mother to a preschool teacher to Paula Vogel, a playwriting mentor, to neighbors, to my own children, to my husband. And as they piled up, I acquired more and more gratitude. And I do think there's something about the place of gratitude that helps you find and value your teachers. Another thing I learned when talking about the book after I'd written it, I would say, oh, I'm working on this, and what teachers have affected you? And I would find out who of my friends and family had profound mentors and who felt they didn't, actually. And that conversation was interesting, because it was like, what are the conditions to invite a teacher into your life? I remember talking to my sister about this, she's a doctor, and she, I think, didn't feel maybe like she had mentors she was very close to in medical school. And she was talking about how you need a certain amount of vulnerability and bravery to kind of raise your hand and say, I want your mentorship outside the classroom. So that was interesting too, realizing it's not just about the teacher appearing. And, you know, there's some kind of sages that say when you're ready, the right teacher will appear. And I at first had attributed that to Buddhism. And then I found out that it was like a misquote, and it was maybe Madame Blavatsky or something.
Who's that?
Theosophical Society.
Oh,
like
right. The British occultists in the 1800s.
So who knows who said it, but I do think there's a sense in which that's true, but then there's the sense in which you have to raise your hand and say, and furthermore, I'm open enough to be taught. I have the time to be taught. I have the openness. I have the bravery that you won't reject me if I, open myself to your teaching.
I have a little Substack community I created within the last year, and I was teaching on a video site. We do these live guided meditation things, and I was teaching loving kindness meditation. Had a bit of an imposter feeling because I'm not technically a teacher, but
I'm right there with you. I understand.
Yeah, well, and you talk about that in the book, how and we'll get to it eventually. But becoming a teacher does provoke, for many people, you say it directly, an imposter sensation. Yeah. Anyway, so I was teaching, in air quotes or not, loving kindness meditation, which involves envisioning a series of beings and then sending them phrases like "may be happy," et cetera, et cetera. And one of the categories of people that you're sending these good vibes to is a mentor or a benefactor. Yeah. And I heard from some people, like, I don't have one of those. I don't know who to fit into that category. So I think what you're describing is not uncommon, that people may feel bereft of teachers.
Yeah. And it's so sad, really. And I think if they reorient maybe towards expanding their idea of what a teacher is, they will find one eventually in their life, because you can't learn to tie your shoe without having a teacher in this life. I mean, we're such dependent creatures from the time we're born. We would just die if we didn't have teachers, mothers, fathers, uncles, someone.
Does it have to be flesh and blood, like you meaning that you're in their physical presence, or can my parasocial relationships with our listeners, where sometimes people say, I feel like I know you. And my answer is, yeah, you kind of do. If you've listened to the show, we've got 700 episodes. Like you do know me. I'm not playing a role on the show. Can I or the teachers who are on the show, probably more importantly, be teachers in that way, or is it actually no? You have to be in their presence.
I think it's still a teaching. I think it's like a book. I mean, I think I've had books that are incredible teachers where the person is dead and I feel like they impacted me hugely. But I think there's still a qualitative difference when there's a person reflecting back at you. And I think that's, why a therapist can be good. It's a real person in real time reflecting back to you and being a mirror. And I think a really good teacher does that. And you don't get that reflective energy from a book or a podcast. It's unidirectional.
But many of us are doing therapy on the phone or on Zoom.
That is true. But at least they're still reflecting back to you, and not in real space, but in real time.
Got it. But so I think what you're saying for the people listening who might think, I just haven't had teachers. Actually, this is where gratitude can be useful. If you reflect back over your life, somebody taught you, how to tie your shoe,
how to
do
with
math.
A fork, yeah,
yes.
How to swim, hopefully.
And you may not, many of them might have been suboptimal teachers, but you still have had teachers. And there's something about reflecting on that might make you more open going forward?
I hadn't really put that together until now, but I like that. I think that's right.
I'll take credit for it.
Please do.
But there's something else here that you're calling for, I think, which is I don't know if what I'm about to say is two things or one thing, but you talk about teachers who are not your kid's nanny. Anybody crossing your path is essentially becoming a teacher. So I think I'd be interested in hearing more about that. And then it kind of goes back to the how. Like there is some sort of mental move that we have to make where we have a willingness to learn. Yes.
I mean, just to talk about the example of my babysitter, because I think it's interesting. So my babysitter's name is Yang Zam. She's Tibetan. She's a Tibetan Buddhist. I have 3 kids. And at one point, I had 3 kids under the age of 3 because I had twins and a 3-year-old. When I first had babies, I thought, I need a little help. Like I had one child. I need a little help when I'm writing or whatever. And then when I had 3 kids, I was like, I need a lot of help. And so Yang Zam was there a lot. And I would be breastfeeding one twin. She'd be bottle feeding the other. We would switch. It's very intimate. And she would be, in the kitchen. I'd come and make tea and she would talk. And basically, I realized at a point she was giving me Dharma teachings. I knew she was one of the kindest, calmest people I'd ever met. And I became more and more curious about what the relationship was between what I perceived as her temperament and also all these teachings that she had access to and that she was born into and that she revered. And so I learned a great deal from her and still do.
Can you talk about some of the learnings?
I think one thing that was interesting about writing the book was that some of the teachings didn't seem reducible. Some of them seemed like I had to tell a story in time and place about the person, that part of the learning was their presence. So I was trying to create portraits of teachers and almost get a sense of their presence, because it wasn't like I would say, Yang Zam taught me that about non-attachment. Yes, she has. But when I think of her, it's the calmness when, 3 kids are crying and she's not yelling at anyone. Or it's, we're all vomiting and she is bringing me a bowl of soup that she made and she's not scared that I'm going to make her sick. It's how the soup tastes and it's how long she spent making it and what felt distilled into the soup. So I guess part of it is like I kept trying to get at that fleshy particular of who the teacher was, as opposed to like a moral or a content that they gave me.
I mean, that I think goes to your core thesis. which is that there is something massively important about the flesh and blood presence of another human being from whom you can learn.
Yeah, there's a wonderful friend of mine, Sarah Curtis, who's a kindergarten teacher, and she once said to me, teachers are always teaching explicitly and implicitly. So when you're teaching kindergartners, you're theoretically teaching them like how to read, or you're reading a story on the rug, but you're also teaching them how to come sit on the rug. And you might not be telling them that, but that's part of what you're teaching them.
I'm going to keep pressing on this because there is something about you that you may not know how to articulate to others, but there was something about you that allowed you to learn from your babysitter, because a lot of us have babysitters or nannies or people in our lives who work for us, and we pay no attention to them at all.
Right. We don't view them as teachers.
We don't. Yeah. I mean, we may not even fully humanize them.
That is true. And, we were talking a little bit before the show about a mutual friend who seems very calm and wise. And you said, well, that's her temperament. She was born with that. So I don't know. Was I born with this position of being a student and being really revering teachers, or did I come to it later? My mom is a teacher. She was an English teacher, and she's still with us. She's an actress too. And she was a great teacher. And so was it that relationship that opened me in that way? But then I talked to my sister, who says she didn't feel like she had the confidence or vulnerability to go in search of a teacher. Same parents.
Yes. But your point, if I'm understanding you correctly, is you don't actually have to have a formal mentor to be taught by anybody who crosses your path.
Right.
You have some factory setting of openness, willingness to learn, or life is pounding enough at your psyche that you have no choice but to open.
Well, maybe that is it. That's such a beautiful phrase. Life is pounding enough at your psyche that you don't have a choice but to open. Yeah.
Give me 15 years of Bell's palsy and I'll start learning from lots of folks.
That is correct. And I think it's interesting that we started there and we didn't move on from there for a while, because I think that is true. And that is deeply what was going on in my life at the time.
Right. So this is maybe one of those examples of things, and it's like it pains me to even say this, where something shitty happens to you and in the end it's kind of good too.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, there's part of me when I was writing Smile that resisted that illness narrative, because you never want to be like, oh, I'm so happy for my facial paralysis. But like I was at this retreat in Ireland last week called Zog Beara. Have you ever been there?
No.
Oh my God, it's like the most beautiful place I've ever been. It's this Tibetan temple, middle of nowhere, Western Cork. And the view is incredible. And they just built this temple, and there are deer, like golden deer outside the temple, because deer is a symbol of meditation and Tibetan Buddhism. And I was thinking, oh, for a long time I hated the image of deer because I thought they gave me a tick that gave me Lyme disease, that gave me Bell's palsy. And I lost a bunch of my life to extreme fatigue and bizarre symptoms, and the facial paralysis probably too. And I thought it also led me to meditation in a funny way. It's so nonlinear. I remember I got a fortune cookie when I was pregnant with the twins, and it said, bring forth what is inside of you that will save your life. And I thought, I had a high-risk pregnancy. I was terrified. And I thought, how will having these twins save my life? And it turned out also all of this incredible medical searching where the Bell's palsy wasn't getting better led me to discover I had celiac disease, which can be really terrible for your health if you don't treat it. And I never would have known I had it if I hadn't had the Bell's palsy. I wouldn't have known my older daughter has it. Turns out my father had it, and he died young of cancer. Didn't know he had it. Who knows? It's all nonlinear, and I do think it's hard for me to derive a moral from illness where it was all worthwhile because of some insight you have. I don't know why I resist that, because I also think it's true.
Well, it's a little pat.
Maybe that's why.
But I think what we can say is it taught you something.
Yes.
It was a teacher in and of itself, and there's a lesson in that for all of us.
Yes.
The show is sponsored by BetterHelp. October 10th, is World Mental Health Day. And this year, we're saying thank you to therapists. I've had many therapists in my life right now, and I totally support the idea of saying thank you to therapists. Therapists have helped me and continue to help me with so much. BetterHelp therapists have helped over 5 million people worldwide. That's millions of stories, millions of journeys, and behind every one is a therapist who showed up, listened, and helped somebody take a step forward. This World Mental Health Day, BetterHelp is honoring those connections and the therapists who make them possible while showing how easy it is to get guidance from a licensed therapist online with BetterHelp. BetterHelp therapists work according to a strict code of conduct and are fully licensed in the U.S. BetterHelp does the initial matching work for you so you can focus on your therapy goals. A short questionnaire helps you identify your needs and preferences, and their 12-plus years of experience and industry-leading match fulfillment rate means they typically get it right the first time. However, if you're not happy with your match, you can switch to a different therapist at any time from their tailored recommendations. This World Mental Health Day, we're celebrating the therapists who've helped millions of people take a step forward. If you're ready to find the right therapist for you, BetterHelp can help you start that journey. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/happier. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/happier. Few things feel better than knowing someone's looking out for you. That is the spirit behind the AT&T Guarantee. Staying connected matters. That's why AT&T has connectivity you can depend on, or they will proactively make it right. That's the AT&T Guarantee, because connection should be dependable, especially in the moments that matter most. Terms and conditions apply. Visit att.com/guarantee for details. AT&T, connecting changes everything. To me, and you are somebody steeped in Buddhism, and so you probably know this, and this is a rap I go on a lot on this show, but one of the original translations of the word that we now translate as mindfulness, the original word is sati, S-A-T-I, which I'm sure is familiar to you. One of the original translations of that is remembering. And part of why I'm so focused on the how on the show is like, you're telling us something really important. We know from the data that like having an open mind is associated with less depression, less anxiety, better performance at work, better performance for presidents, better performance for startups. Like it is a really key attribute.
Yeah.
But how do you remember to do it? The thought that popped into my head was like, you should get a deer tattoo.
I don't have any tattoos.
I got a tattoo, and this is another thing that my listeners might be tired of me talking about, but my wife and I got our first tattoos a couple of years ago. And this one is just a very off-brand, and it's earnestness acronym that says FTBOAB in it, which stands for the Buddhist phrase of for the benefit of all beings. And it's super helpful. It's right next to my watch.
Yeah.
It does look a little, some of my Jewish friends, and I am half Jewish, have joked it looks a little Holocaust-y. So I've been trying to think about ways to like brighten it up with some accessory tattoos around it. But from a purely utilitarian standpoint, it reminds me all the time, dude, like your job is to be useful. As somebody who's wired for selfishness, and I'm not saying the key letter here is A, all beings. So it's not like a catastrophic altruism. It's thinking of self-interest within this broader perspective. So anyway, so we need reminders, I think, to live life as a student.
Yes. And do you think meditation helped you do that? I mean, clearly you've always been really curious about other people because you were a journalist and you wanted to know how people worked, right?
Yeah, but I think that a lot of the curiosity previously was a kind of extractive curiosity. You know, I was good at getting people's stories out of them so that I had a good story.
Right.
But now it's more like, well, how can I be useful?
Yeah.
And that's, again, and I'm not taking this thing too far. It's not like I can't walk down the street because anybody who's in distress, actually, if somebody was in distress, I would help them. But I'm not paralyzed by compulsive compassion or anything like that. It's just trying to get myself out of the mindset of what's in it for me. Does this person like me? What are they thinking of me? Blah, 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 all the time.
Yeah. And I will say there was something about the Bell's palsy that divided my life into before and after, in that, you know, before I got Bell's palsy, I I had a play on Broadway. It was up for a Tony Award. It was nominated for a Pulitzer. Like everything was going really well. There was a kind of sense of abundance. I had one kid. I had two more. I was in a happy marriage, blah, blah. And then I had the twins, lost my smile. In my mind, I also lost a kind of identity. And everything had to shift. And why I was writing plays, I think, also had to shift. And it was shortly thereafter that I became a teacher. But I think what you're talking about, the making art or doing a job without thinking of how it might benefit others, there's always a danger of solipsism, I think, in the writer's life.
Yes. And again, because I am pretty utilitarian on some level, like my point is that this attitude, that's not my point, I'm stealing it from the Dalai Lama. This attitude is self-interested.
Yeah.
It's what the Dalai Lama calls it wise selfishness. If you're thinking about other people's benefit, like you will be happier.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is a non sequitur or maybe it follows lightly on many of the previous strands, but you were talking about learning from your babysitter. We have a long time, 10-year-long relationship with our nanny, my son's nanny. I have one kid, and her name is Eleanor. Although he started calling her as a tiny child, Nene. And now her whole family calls her Nene. Anyway, so Nene/Eleanor said this thing to me early on when the kid must have been like 1.5 or 2. We were at some sort of, in New York City, they have all these like kids club things. And all the other nanny's children were coming up to Eleanor. And they weren't doing that with anybody else.
Right.
And I said, why is that? And she said, kids know where the love is. And I think about that all the time. I think it's harder to become a vector of love if people can't see it on your face. And I don't have Bell's palsy, although it's in my family, but I have a resting bitch face. I really do. And I hear about it from my team a lot. And I hear about it from my wife, like the scowl that just comes over my face. And I'm not even in a bad mood. And so there's something there's something in here that feels important. Am I making any sense?
Yes. And I think people know where the love is a beautiful phrase. And there's so many ways we know. It's the attentiveness with which someone's regarding us. It's that they stop what they're doing and they listen. I learned to make more hand gestures or to kind of murmur when I was listening so people knew I was listening because I couldn't mirror their facial expressions. So there are 1,000,001 ways that we know.
So we've talked about learning to orient toward the world as a student. And I still think tattoos would be helpful in this regard. Actually, a couple of weeks ago, right at this table, I interviewed Ezra Klein, and he has a tattoo that says, "Is that so?" Which is a Zen expression. And that's a great habit of mine. It is a student habit of mine.
Is that so? That's very Ezra Klein. I like it.
Yes, it is. Do you know him?
No, but I listened to him.
Yeah, he's great. So we've talked about approaching life as a student, but what about being a teacher or a mentor? We touched on it lightly, but you've gone through this process 15 years ago, right after giving birth to your youngest children and being hit with this Bell's palsy. You started to teach at Yale. I'd be interested in hearing a little bit about that, but also to broaden it to like, how can we all approach our lives not only as students, but also as teachers?
I started out as a substitute teacher, and it was interesting because my mentor, Paula Vogel, who was hugely influential and is sort of why I write plays, and she needed a sub. She was doing a play on Broadway called Indecent, and she called me and said, "Can you sub for me?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't know. I have these little kids. I'm just like, oh, there's a lot going on." And then I thought, I always say yes to Paula. If she needs me, the answer is yes. So I started teaching, and I loved it. I found it utterly delightful. And then Paula realized she loved having more time to write, and so she kind of kept taking a pause, and I kept teaching. But I tell a story in the book about a dream I had before that first class where I showed up to class, but Paula was also there, and Paula was talking, and I just couldn't open my mouth. I couldn't speak. It was a kind of classic teacher anxiety dream. And I think it took me a long time to realize that I have my own stuff to pass on and give, that it wasn't all just funneled through Paula. But I think part of that was also being honest about the legacy I do have from her And so teaching this class lessons from my teachers, I would teach Paula's work. I would teach Maria Irene Fornes's work, who was an important teacher to me, Chuck Mee's work. And then I would sort of change things up. Sometimes I would teach a former student's work because the more I taught, the more I saw students as potential teachers. And I think we're so obsessed with originality in this culture that we like to think writers are just kind of born in this like swaggering, like, individualistic way. And for me, lineage is important in the same way that it is in the Buddhist tradition.
What did you learn that might be applicable for the rest of us in terms of you write about how you had these imposter feelings and it showed up in your dreams as you were starting to teach. Most of us are not going to become teachers in a formal sense.
Right.
Can we start to think about ourselves as having something to teach? Yeah, and how do we make that shift, and what are the benefits? What's the goal on either side of that shift?
I love the question, can we think about ourselves as having something to teach? It's just a really beautiful question. And again, I think it presupposes some confidence. You have to have a certain amount of confidence to think you have something valuable to teach. And I'm trying to think for myself what was in that reorientation, because I had confidence as a writer. I had a certain amount of ego as a writer, but I didn't walk into the classroom being hugely confident that I had something of my own to teach and give that was separate from my teachers. And that just took practice, I think. So for me, it's partly a practice. Just do it. Just try it. I don't know. I'm flashing on when I first met Paula Vogel, it was at Brown, and my father had just died. He died of cancer when, I guess, a sophomore. He was diagnosed when I was a freshman. And I was having trouble writing and reading. I was distracted. And Paula asked me to coffee. Again, interesting that it was outside the classroom. I said, I'm having trouble focusing. My father just died. I was really close with him. And she said, you need to look at this grief indirectly. You need to not stare at it directly. And she said, write a play in which a dog is a protagonist. And I did. And it was about my father's illness and death through the eyes of the family dog, who was just sad that he didn't come home. And that was my first play. And so when I think of what allowed Paula to give me that gift, part of it was that her brother had died of AIDS, and she knew grief. She knew what I was experiencing, and she knew that for herself, she needed to look at it obliquely, not head on. And I do think there's a love that animates the willingness to teach. That's why we have to have some boundaries around it, I suppose, because I do think love animates it. But it can also be a love for your art form, your love for what you do, wanting it to continue after you're gone. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how conscious that is.
I don't know that I would have used the word teacher, but I think about it in the context of parenting and also running an organization. Yeah. So I have a team of I think maybe 12 people.
Yeah.
When you're a boss, and I'm sure you've noticed this on productions you've been a part of, everybody, and this kind of goes back to Bell's palsy, everybody is scrutinizing every movement of your face all the time.
Right.
And they're keying off of you. One of the things we talk about all the time is the old cliche about the fish rotting from the head.
Yes.
When there's a problem within the organization, my instinct is all right, how am I contributing to this?
Right.
And so just being aware that as you move through the world, especially as a parent or a boss, you are teaching all the time, whether you like it or not.
Yep.
So how do you want to do it? Do you want to do it with some love, or do you want to do it the way I did it for most of my life, which is completely mindlessly?
I totally agree. And, it's like when you're with your children, say, and you're at the store and someone's being a dick to you and you're irritated and you're fed up and your instinct is to react and to be rude back to the person, say. And then you have these two kids in tow and you maybe stop for a moment. And part of it's creating that pause to think, okay, what am I teaching? What am I teaching my kids if I yell at this person? Do I want my kids to learn that? And so, again, I think it's about investigating those pauses. You
touched on this earlier, the one of the things, and you write about it, one of the things you've noticed as a teacher is there are these when the student becomes the master, moments where the student starts teaching the teacher. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah. One of the most dramatic examples I have of it is my student, Max Ritvo, who was an astonishing poet. And he walked into my classroom. He was 20 at Yale. And he was so wise, not just brilliant, but wise. And that's bizarre in a 20-year-old. And then I learned that he had Ewing sarcoma, which is a pediatric cancer. And he had a recurrence when he was my student. And we became really close. He went back to Columbia to get his MFA in poetry. He sort of said, I want to write with all the time I have left. And he did. And I learned so much from him in that short time about how to write up against a terrifying illness that he had, how to love demonstratively and freely and kind of boldly with the time he had left, and how to be open. Max died when he was 25, and we worked on a book of letters that we'd written back and forth, and then I made it into a play after he died. And part of what the play explores is when that friendship changes, when it goes from teacher-student to friends to teacher-student, swapped. And I've always been very moved by those stories in Tibetan Buddhism where the teacher dies and the student of the master goes looking for the reincarnation of the teacher in a baby, so that there's this unbroken lineage. I guess there's some trouble, I suppose, with that system, but I still can't help but find it beautiful, the idea of it, that the student becomes the teacher, and it just keeps going in this infinite loop.
But again, it comes back to openness. Like I imagine there are some teachers who just are so embedded in their identity as the imparter of wisdom that they would never have allowed Max to teach them anything.
That's probably true. But interestingly, Max had a bunch of teachers who he flipped into students like pancakes. It was like me, Louise Glick, Lucy Brock-Broido. I think many of us had the same experience. And part of it was there was something undeniable about who he was as a writer and his wisdom that you just thought, oh, yeah, you're a colleague. Okay, show me. He would also ask to read your manuscript. He asked to read my poetry. And at that time, I didn't share my poetry with anyone. That was like separate. It was my secret hobby away from playwriting that was mine alone. I didn't publish. And Max was like, I know you have poems. And I want to read them. And you should publish them.
One of the questions you dwell on in the book is, can you be your own teacher? Where did you land on that?
I decided that you can't. It's interesting. Someone asked me the question, and my first impulse was, oh, yes, of course you can be your own teacher, because look at all the autodidacts and look at books. And then I thought about it, and I thought, no, the whole point of my writing these sketches of teachers is that we require the other, that if knowledge is a social phenomenon, you need another person, and go and find another person.
I'm just trying to think about how I feel about that.
Yeah, how do you feel about that?
Well, I don't know. I'm going to think out loud. There is a thing where, as you meditate, you are learning from yourself.
Yeah.
I also think one of the most electrifying pieces of wisdom for me in the last couple of years has been learning that my ability to be a mentor for others is something I can channel toward myself. So if I'm in extremis, like I don't like the elevators in this building where we're doing this, I can, be like, yo, you got this.
Right. Right.
So I don't know if that's properly a teacher, but it is a relationship to oneself that is supportive.
It seems like something about meditation and observing one's own mind, you start to develop a little inner teacher person that you can be in relation to.
Yes, I think that's right. And then, of course, it raises the question, like, okay, then who are you anyway? If there's a part of you that's talking to another part of you, where's the you? Is there some core you? And as you know, the Buddhist proposition is it's a mystery, and that there's a lot of healing to be had in just knocking on the door repeatedly and checking it out.
Maybe that's what enlightenment is when you get to the point where you are deeply your own teacher. And so maybe for me, it's just feeling like, yeah, no, I'm I'm still mucking around. I still need a teacher. It also feels like the little inner teacher person you're talking about who you've internalized. In a way, it's internalizing your own teacher.
Yeah.
So you still got it from somewhere.
All of everything, all the words that just came pouring out of you are, to me, pointing toward porousness. You know, that even if you're enlightened, you said maybe if you're enlightened, you are your own teacher. But the you goes into scare quotes through that sentence, because an enlightened person is aware that there is no core nugget of themselves. And so what they are doing is opening up and being in relationship to reality.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
I'm just making it up. I don't even know if I'm right. So like, you're talking to like a guy who slept at a Holiday Inn last night.
You
so
did?
Like, no, I didn't. But you know those old commercials where the guy's performing brain surgery and they're like, "Are you a doctor?" And he's like, "No, but I slept at a Holiday Inn last night." Another thing you talk about is finding a meditation teacher. And I hear about this all the time. In fact, reading this section of your book got me thinking about this idea that I've had for a long time, which is I want to create some sort of free online service that connects people to meditation teachers. Because there is no service for that right now. It's like all just happenstance. But can you tell your story of finding a teacher?
Please do that first. That's so good. I mean, I had this insane experience where I had been working on a play, The Oldest Boy, at Lincoln Center, and it's actually about that. It was about a story Yang Zum told me where she knew people who had a restaurant in the States. They had a little boy, and someone came from India and said, "We think your child is a reincarnation of a high lama or teacher." And I said, "Oh my God, what did they do?" And she said, "Well, they sent him to the monastery in India to be educated." And so I thought about what would happen if it were a mixed marriage between a Westerner and someone brought up in this culture where that would be, you could freely give that without just falling to pieces. So anyway, we had a lama come visit us at Lincoln Center to talk about reincarnation, give us some context. And then a year later, I ran into him at Penn Station, and I had been reading the Asian journals of Thomas Merton, and I was on this very particular page, and I kind of glance up, and there's Lama Pema standing in his robes. And he said, "Oh, hi." And I said, "Oh, hi." And he said, "What are you reading?" And I said, "Oh, the Asian journals of Thomas Merton." He said, "Funny, my teacher's handwriting is in that book." And I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, this page you're on, this is my teacher's handwriting. Thomas Merton met with him when he was in India, I guess." And I thought, that is incredibly strange. And it felt like, okay, so I clearly should be learning from this person. Somehow he was just deposited into my life at a train station. And then we took this ride together. He was going to he was teaching in Vermont, and I was going to New Haven to teach. And I remember him saying to me, and he didn't ask me about the Bell's palsy, but as we talked about, it's, it's this implicit thing. And he just kept saying to me, "It's always possible to smile. You know that, right?" And in my head, I'm kind of thinking, no, it's not. Mm-hmm. Not for me. But he was saying it's always possible to smile. You'd think with a kind of mystical experience like that, I would be sitting at this lama's feet like every day to absorb whatever I could. Well, no, actually, I wish that was the story, but no, it's like, yeah, when he does a teaching, I'll come, and I've done meditation with him, but I don't see him that often as I should. But it was an incredible coincidence and kind of act of grace that I ran into him again.
So at this point, do you not have a formal Buddhist teacher?
It depends how you define it, I suppose. I took refuge with a teacher, Jetsuma.
Can you explain what taking refuge is?
So taking refuge is really simple. It's just taking refuge in some precepts that most of us would, I think, agree are good, like not killing anyone. Have you read this teacher's book or any of her books, Jetsuma Palmo Tenzin Palmo?
I think she's been on the show. She's a Westerner who lived in a cave in
Tibet.
Yeah,
she's been on the show.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I just find her incredible. And she was giving a teaching in New York, and I'd read her book, so I just went to the teaching, and she was like, "Would anyone like to take refuge?" And I hadn't been planning to, but I was like, "Oh, I would." So then the teacher just cuts a little piece of your hair, and that's all that's involved. But she's not formally my teacher because she lives in India at a nunnery. I read her books, and I listen to her talks when I can.
I mean, it is an interesting question of what does it mean to have a teacher, a meditation teacher?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in a way, I could imagine if you squint, like what you're describing with the gentleman you saw at the train station, he is your teacher. Like you go to his teachings when you can, and I'm sure you read or listen to his public utterances lectures, or writings or whatever. And so you have a mixture of asynchronous and real-time teaching from him. And so you could, I think, fairly call him your teacher.
Right.
I have a teacher, Joseph Goldstein, with whom I have a much more sort of integrated relationship. He's part of my life on a regular basis. But that was just sheer luck or karma or whatever you want to call it. And so I think there are probably gradations here. Somebody listening to this might consider any number of the teachers who come traipsing through this show, Vinnie Ferraro, Sebene Selassie, Jeff Warren. They may consider them their teachers because they go to their retreats every other year and make it a habit to read their newsletter or whatever it is. So I think there are lots of ways to configure this. You know those moments when someone just takes care of something for you? That's what AT&T is doing with the AT&T Guarantee. Staying connected matters. That's why AT&T has connectivity you can depend on, or they will proactively make it right. That's the AT&T Guarantee. Because staying connected isn't optional, it's essential. And AT&T wants you to feel that somebody's got your back. Terms and conditions apply. Visit att.com/guarantee for details. AT&T, connecting changes everything.
I feel like traditionally what seems really useful is having a teacher who you're in touch with. Like, that's amazing that you're in touch with Joseph Goldstein on a regular basis. And you can say, oh, I was meditating and this thing happened and what do I do? And then they can tell you what to do. I mean, traditionally that seems great.
Yeah, well, I mean, traditionally I think people lived with their teacher.
Right.
And so it was super intense. They were an attendant for the teacher.
Right.
I'm sure Joseph would love me to be, fetching his slippers. If he were here, he would make that joke. We don't live in that world. Most of us don't live in that world. We're not at a nunnery.
Well, and that seems like an important point to make because these classical relationships with Buddhist meditation teachers were for monks. And we're householders and we're secular and we have our jobs and we're trying to absorb the wisdom that we can. But they're not these dyads that are in a monastery.
I think that's true. And there are ways to fit it into your life. If you live in a big city like we're in New York City right now, you can join the New York Zen Center for Contemplative Care and learn from Koshin and Chodo. Or if you are in LA, you can join Insight LA and sit with Christiana Wolf once in a while. And so there are options for us. And if you don't live in a place, or if you don't have the time to do that, or you don't live in a place where that's an option, then, see if you can find, this is the tool I want to build. See if you can connect with somebody who can talk to you over Zoom or clear out a couple days every year to go on a retreat with somebody. There are lots of ways to find a teacher in this regard, I think.
Which leads me back to the question of presence, I guess, and what a quicksilvery thing it is. But, there are these classic texts where a Zen master or these other masters, it would be their presence that would cause enlightenment or the contemplation of their face even, speaking of faces. Or I've talked to people who've been in the presence of the Dalai Lama who say things like, oh, and his sheer presence, the compassion that he evinced did a thing.
Yes.
And I don't know, maybe you find that talking to these people on your show.
There's an expression, I think it comes from an American teacher whose name I'm forgetting, who's a Zen teacher, something about the soft sermon of your pores. And I think that's really true.
Mm-hmm.
Just hanging out with Joseph makes a big difference for me. I just see how he handles stuff.
Yes.
I was in distress 18 months ago. I was in the middle of a really protracted business divorce, separating from the meditation app that I started. And I had a lot of insomnia and anxiety and stuff. And I was at a really low point. And Joseph came to stay with us. He stays at our house once in a while. And I stayed up late talking to him about it. And I just felt totally better.
Yep. Yeah. It's amazing. I listen to him sometimes when I have insomnia. On some kind of app, not the divorced app, some waking up app. Or
Sam Harris's waking up app. Yeah. I'm increasingly kind of moving over to working with Sam.
It's good.
Yeah, it's really good. It's a really good app. Sam, Joseph, and I just recorded an 8-hour series on the Noble Eightfold Path that now lives on the Waking Up app. So next time you can't sleep, put
Great.
that on. Yes.
It's great. And Joseph Goldstein had this one bit of advice I found so useful about certain negative thought patterns. And he said something like intervening with just enough.
Yeah.
Or
yes.
Dead end.
Dead end. Yes. So dead end, I find really, in fact, when I was in this situation where I was separating from my business partners, Joseph, one of his key pieces of advice was when you're perseverating about it, dead end.
Mm-hmm.
Just drop that phrase into your mind because there's no more thinking that's going to be helpful. You've thought this through.
Right.
Like at this point, you're just wasting your time. And I will say, just it's not just Joseph, because I have this incredible job where I interview hundreds and hundreds of Dharma teachers, either on Zoom or in person, and they're a big part of my personal life. I hang out with them. There's a kind of positive peer pressure that takes place where I'm just learning all the time. Like, don't be a dick.
Yeah. Don't be a dick. Yeah. And in my world, it's don't work with assholes.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Well, I'd imagine in entertainment, you're in a highbrow corner of the entertainment industry, but yeah, there's probably not a few assholes.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because theater is, I think of it as here's theater and there's poetry on one side, which is where I started, and there's show business on the other side, and theater's somewhere in the middle of poetry and show business, and there can be assholes on either end. I'm
sure there are poets who are dicks.
Oh, definitely.
Speaking of being open, I have historically had a really closed mind about theater, specifically musicals.
Oh.
So, and you don't do musicals, I don't think.
I'm working on a musical with Sarah Bareilles right now.
Sarah Bareilles, good friend of mine, and has been on the show. I will drop some links to those conversations in the show notes. I love Sarah Bareilles.
Amazing.
A really great person.
But you were saying you had a closed mind about musicals.
And I have a new friend who I met when I was at TED a couple of years ago, which is an obnoxious sentence to say, but her name, she's quite a well-known novelist. Her name is Maria Semple. She wrote Where Did You Go, Bernadette? And we were seated near each other at a dinner during TED, and we really hit it off. And we the next year at TED, she came back, and we literally just spent the whole time together. We just did everything together. And then she later moved to New York City. And so she's really into the theater to the point where she, I think, goes every night. Or she goes to something almost every night. I've never really been in that habit. I lived, 15 blocks north of the theater district and never went. And so she has been gently bullying me into going and has taken me to a couple plays. And she took me to a musical recently, and I have historically really hated it.
Yes.
Any plot where they break into song, I just can't stay with it.
Yeah. What musical was it?
And so it was Sunset Boulevard, which just won a Tony a couple of days before we were recording this conversation. And I had the same problems with it that I have with all musicals, and I really did enjoy it. And part of it was being next to Maria, who I think she won't give me the exact number. It's like a person who collects too many cats, but it's more than 10 times she's been to the show.
Really?
And she was so happy, and she loved the show. And there were. I don't know if you've.
I haven't seen that particular show.
Okay,
but I've heard it's an amazing performance.
There's something that happens that I won't spoil at the beginning of the second act that is truly delightful. So there were moments in the show that I really, really enjoyed it. So anyway, Maria is my teacher in this regard, but it required some openness on my part.
I will have to get you 2 free tickets to Eurydice before it closes.
Yeah, so Eurydice, we're recording this at this point when people are listening to it. It will have been closed or moved.
Yeah, something.
What is Eurydice about?
It's the story of the Orpheus myth told from Eurydice's point of view. So you follow Eurydice to the underworld, and in my version, she meets her father there. First, they don't recognize each other because the idea is that you've forgotten language and memory in the afterlife once you dip yourself in the river. And then somehow the father has held on to some language, and so he recognizes her and reteaches her language and memory, and they come to know each other again. And then by the time Orpheus comes back, Eurydice isn't totally sure whether to go with him. So it's a modern retelling of that. I
key in on the fact that there's teaching that happens.
There is teaching. And my father was a wonderful teacher for me, I will say.
You mentioned fortune cookies earlier, about you having a fortune that was resonant in some way about bringing forth that which is inside you that will save you. Your father in your freshman year at Brown, I think.
Yeah, good memory, yeah.
Got cancer, and it definitely stuck with me that I think he was my age. He was 53 or something like that. And you went out to dinner, and he got a fortune cookie that was blank.
Yeah, it was awful. He had just had this diagnosis, and he took, me and my college friends out, and he opened his cookie, and it was blank, and we all just kind of looked away.
Oof. I hear in your stories an openness to something else, if openness is a through line, if not the through line. You have a kind of openness to synchronicity or signs from the universe.
Yes.
Which is an area where I have some, I don't know. I mean, I have some openness. I'm moving from absolutely don't make too much of coincidences to maybe there is something there. But can you say a little bit more about your openness in this regard?
Most artists that I know maybe are more open to synchronicity and coincidence than, scientists. And I'm married to a scientist who kind of goes, oh, he can always find an explanation for the amazing coincidences that I bring to him and share with him. But there's one story in the book about a dream I had. Sometimes dreams, I think, are portals into a time-space shrinkage or tesseract, like in Wrinkle in Time. And I have a friend, Polly Noonan, who is a dear, dear friend, a collaborator, and I had an opera version of Eurydice that was happening at the Met, and she was coming out with my mother to see it. I had a dream that night that she gave me two $2 bills for luck. And we had a whole conversation in the dream about labor and friendship and luck and whether it was strange that she'd given me money for an opening. And we talked about inequality in terms of some artists making money, some artists not. It's a whole interesting conversation about it. And the next morning, I said, Polly, I had this crazy dream about you last night, that you gave me two $2 bills for my opening. And she just kind of texted back, what? And then she showed me a picture of the two $2 bills that she had gotten out of a bank in Chicago to give me. And I was like, oh, well, message received. And I don't know how to explain that.
Precognition. Maybe your Buddhist practice has really progressed because allegedly you get superpowers the more you're honing your ability to concentrate.
Well, we don't really want them, do we? Because, gosh, there's so many things I don't want to know about. I'm happy to know about Polly's $2 bills, but I'm sure there's things on the horizon I don't want to know about.
Exactly. But there are things on the horizon that you would be psyched if you learned too.
That's true.
I don't know how to explain the $2 bill dream, and I'm sure your husband would struggle to explain it too. I think where I've come on this is that, like, looked at through the law of cause and effect, which seems non-negotiable. Like, yes, everything that's happening right now is happening because of a huge ocean of causes and conditions.
Yeah.
Well, then everything's magic. It can't explain the $2 bills, but it can wake you up.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love the idea that everything's magic. I also think about art, for example. Like I always thought showing a coincidence in a short story or movie was sort of silly because it's art. So of course you can have a coincidence because it's manufactured. And I remember feeling that very strongly as a kind of smug 22-year-old or something, like seeing, I don't know, maybe it's like a Raymond Carver short story that was turned into a movie and saying, I don't like it. It's based on coincidence. Of course they can have coincidence because someone's making it up. But now that I'm older and maybe more humble and maybe more curious, I think he's demonstrating a different kind of verisimilitude, which is what you just said about everything being kind of magical.
I would be remiss if I let you go without talking about Mark Epstein, who you write about in a veiled way. Dr. Mark Epstein, for people who have never heard of him, is quite a well-known Buddhist psychiatrist. It's very hard to get in as one of his patients, but you managed to do that, and you've seen him for about 10 years. And you talk a little bit about what he taught you, and there was a thing he said to you that really landed with me. I hope you'll know what I'm pointing at.
Yeah.
Can you tell us?
And Mark Epstein is just the most wonderful writer and psychotherapist. And I remember talking to him at one point about why is it that there's so many Buddhist practitioners that seem to just get more and more angry? Like you think you practice meditation, why are you so angry? And it doesn't seem to be helping. Like you're getting worse. And he made some kind of joke about how one thing that psychotherapy and Buddhism have in common is that neither of them work. Some kind of joke like that. And
That's a very Mark joke.
Yeah. And I kind of said, well, so what's the point then if neither of them work? And he said, the point is lightness, that was the goal of both. And I thought that was so beautiful.
It does undermine the assertion that they don't work.
Yeah, it does. I mean, and I think about his teachings, and one thing that he's taught me that I really didn't understand when I first met him was leaving an emotion alone or leaving a thought alone. I really didn't understand it. When I'd done therapy in the past, there was like this excavation process. And you just kept poking at something, like poking at this wound, like poke, 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 poke. And it was like it wasn't getting better. I just felt like I kept poking at it. And Mark had this amazing ability to kind of step away and not touch it. And I feel like when I first encountered this method, I thought, well, isn't that a kind of denial? And it took me such a long time to be like, oh, right. It's sort of what you're doing in meditation when you have a thought and you acknowledge it and then you let it float away.
Yes. I wonder if what Mark's teaching in that regard is a cousin of Dead End.
Yeah.
The lightness thing definitely resonated with me. And Joseph, who is also a teacher to Mark, talks about one way to understand this hard to understand concept, especially for beginners, of enlightenment is lightening up. And I thought about naming mine. I've been struggling a lot with like, what am I going to call my next book? I have a wise ass title that I really like, but people hate it.
I'm good with titles. What are you
Okay,
good?
well, the wise ass title is Me, a Love Story, which I think is funny. And when I say it to people, they tend to laugh because they're being polite or they're with me,
It's
and
funny.
I say it in a funny way.
Yeah.
But it does carry the distinct danger of being misperceived as a book about narcissism, which is not. And I've thought about a subtitle that very clearly says this is not a book about narcissism, which might solve the problem.
Yeah.
But lightening up is also very much on point. It does capture the spirit of the book, and that as you pull your head out of your ass, as you start taking yourself less seriously and personally, you are lighter, more available. And I think that's what Mark is pointing to in his comment to you.
I like both titles. I mean, Me, a Love Story. I mean, I think the thing about lightening up and humor is humor doesn't end run around linear thinking. It's like something's funny. It's funny.
Yeah.
And I do think there's a kind of philosophical undergirding of comedy for me that has to do with that when you see that something's absurd, it is a kind of not enlightenment, but it's delicious.
Yes.
And it's hard to teach, actually. But when you do see those great meditation masters, they are fucking hilarious.
Yes, they are.
And they're amused by life constantly.
Yes.
And it's like those Zen koans where you just go, oh, like the juxtaposition is funny and absurd, and you do a little tesseract between ideas. So I like your Me, a Love Story, but it's snarkier than lightening up.
Yes. Snarky is actually what I want, because I want the title to have a wink. I'm not a teacher, right? I'm not a proper teacher.
Yeah.
And so for me, the value add is I can make you laugh.
Yeah.
So I lean toward titles like that, and it feels like the right title for this book.
Yep.
But I could live with lightening up. I've also thought about Contact High because that is part of another part. This is a book about love. So
it's a book about love.
Yes. All kinds of love, not just romantic love, just including self-love. It's just
I see.
You could call it a book about relationship to life. It's actually not. There is a huge through line about openness, which is the through line of this discussion, I think, because we tend, and the Buddha talked about it a lot, we contract around our views and ideas, and that cuts you off from real relationship with life.
Yeah.
To me, that's what your book is. That's what comes screaming through in the parts of the manuscript I've read. It's like, how can you orient yourself to a world where you don't think you know everything?
I was at this teaching in Ireland, and it was on metta, and the teacher said something that maybe you already know, but I thought was so useful in terms of that thing about how love fits into a meditative framework, that it's not cold and detached. And she was saying it's like how the sun has both light and heat. And she was saying, so like this practice is supposed to, like, you're supposed to get warm here.
Yes.
And then the light part is your understanding and your insight, but you're supposed to, and she went like that, and you're supposed to get.
She put her hand on her chest.
She put her hand on her heart.
I'm writing that down because I had not heard it before. And I think that's exactly it. And I had some decent amount of clarity in my meditation practice, but no warmth or very little warmth. And so turning up the volume on warmth it's totally changed my life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's an overused phrase, this changed my life or whatever. I hear it a lot in my line of work, but this is a genuine change. Like, I would argue that this is the thing to learn.
Which Sharon Salzberg, I think, is very good at teaching also that part of meditation.
She is the master, and without her she's a huge influence on me personally, and without her, she was really the first to emphasize this aspect of the Buddhist teaching among Western teachers, because it was really about like the light, the clarity, the seeing your own patterns with some mindfulness. And she was the one who really emphasized METTA, which is the ancient word for loving kindness. One last thing I want to ask you about from the book. You talk about learning both from a teacher who rejected an idea of yours and also from critics who've criticized your work. So basically seeing, and this goes back to the beginning of the conversation, obnoxious or difficult people as having something to teach.
Yes. I tell a story about an art teacher, an elementary school art teacher, who had this assignment where you're supposed to make a beautiful drawing, and I thought I made a beautiful drawing and out of crayon. And then he was a cranky man. And then he said now he wanted everyone to paint black paint over it and take a safety pin and make a pattern in the paint. And I was like, every part of my being was like, no, I like my drawing as is. I'm not doing your assignment. And I think he made me. He compelled me to draw black over it and then do his assignment. I hated it. And so for me, the lesson there was actually not to take an assignment that you hate. I suppose like the non-attached view could have been, oh, maybe you learned something from not being attached to your first drawing. But the already fairly strong ego in me as an artist was like, no, that I reject your assignment. I think the tricky teachers, sometimes all we learn from them is how to get through and how to not have a toxic teacher ruin our enthusiasm and our joy for the task. And sometimes relying on your own resilience and well-being while getting through the bad teacher is all you learn. But that's no small thing.
No, I think you say quite directly the lesson you've learned from rejection is persistence.
Yeah. Well, and Paula Vogel had this amazing teaching on rejection that felt like an inoculation against rejection. And I tell students this all the time because being a writer is negotiating a relationship with rejection. And so Paula would say, okay, take all of your rejection letters and put them in piles. This was back when we had actual paper rejection letters. And she'd say, okay, this one is a Xerox one. And it acknowledges receipt of your work. That's one pile. Now, the next pile it has a signature. Now lick it and see that it's been signed. And she'd say let's say 10%, because it's your podcast, only 10% get a signature. So that's really good if you get rejected in that way. So that's a good rejection. Then there's another letter that says it's signed and it says, we want to read your next play and we want you to come in and talk to us. She said, no one gets that. Like, that's really special if you get that. That's like 1% or less. So if you get that, don't fixate on the rejection. Think instead of the gradations and actually that you're making progress. And that changed everything for me in terms of how I perceive rejection. And I started as a poet, and in a funny way, I think if someone like Paula had given me that sermon about rejection in poetry, I might have just stayed a poet and not crossed over into playwriting. But because Paula was modeling not just the content, but how to survive as a writer in the world, I felt like, okay, I can do this thing.
Courage.
Courage, yeah.
2 questions at the close. 1, is there something we should have talked about that we didn't?
No. It's funny. I always say no to that question because I sort of think what we talked about was delightful and we didn't need to talk about anything else.
2nd question, remind everybody of the name of your most recent book and any other works that we should know about, some sort of website where we can get everything, social media, anything. Just plug everything, please.
Okay, sure. The book is called Lessons from My Teachers, From Preschool to the Present. I have a play, Eurydice, that maybe is running at Signature, or maybe it's not still running at Signature. I have a musical with Sarah Bareilles I'm working on based on The Interestings that should be coming to you at some point.
Based on the what?
It's a book called The Interestings by Meg Wolitzer. I love this book. Oh, I do have the horrible, dreaded Instagram. I am on Instagram. I have a website, www.sarahruhlplaywright.com. I think that's it.
Thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.